The sharp crack of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Montana, in 1876, sending Emma Calloway ducking behind a water trough, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She hadn't meant to end up in the middle of a dispute between a drunken miner and the town's sheriff. But here she was, trapped in yet another dangerous situation that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Emma pressed a trembling hand to her cheek, feeling the tender bruise that had bloomed there just days before. The mark was the least of her worries now, but it served as a constant reminder of what she was running from, who she was running from. Her husband of 3 years, Thomas Blackburn, had a temper that grew more violent with each passing month, and Emma had finally gathered the courage to flee in the dead of night, taking nothing but the clothes on her back and what little money she had secretly saved. "Come on out, miss." "It's safe now," called a deep voice, pulling Emma from her thoughts. Warily, she peeked over the edge of the trough. The sheriff had subdued the miner, and a small crowd had gathered around the commotion. Grateful for the distraction, Emma rose shakily to her feet, keeping her head down as she tried to slip away unnoticed. She needed to find somewhere to stay for the night before continuing her journey westward, somewhere Thomas wouldn't think to look for her. She had barely made it 10 paces when a firm hand caught her elbow, stopping her in her tracks. Emma flinched violently, her free hand flying up to shield her face. "Whoa there, I ain't gonna hurt you," said the same deep voice from before. "You're shaking like a leaf. Are you all right, madam?" Emma kept her face angled downward, her long brown hair falling forward to hide her bruised cheek. "I'm fine, thank you. Please, I need to go." The man in front of her stood tall, his broad shoulders blocking out the late afternoon sun. She caught a glimpse of worn leather boots and faded denim before her eyes darted away again. "You don't look fine to me," he said softly. "I'm Garrett Kingston, foreman at the Double K Ranch just outside of town. Can I help you in some way?" Emma shook her head quickly. "No, thank you, Mr. Kingston. I just need to be on my way." Garrett didn't release her arm, though his grip remained gentle. "At least let me buy you a meal before you go. The saloon's got decent food, and you look like you haven't eaten in days." Her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl at the mention of food. Emma hadn't eaten since the previous morning, having spent most of her meager funds on the stagecoach that had brought her to Redemption Creek. I can't," she whispered, even as her resolve weakened. "Please," Garrett insisted. "No strings attached. Just food and maybe some coffee to warm you up." Emma hesitated, weighing her options. She could continue on, hungry and with nowhere to spend the night, or she could accept this stranger's kindness and at least face the coming challenges on a full stomach. "All right," she conceded finally. "Just a quick meal." Garrett nodded, careful to keep a respectful distance as he guided her toward the saloon. Emma kept her face angled away from curious onlookers, painfully aware of how she must appear disheveled, bruised, and clearly running from something. The warmth of the saloon enveloped her as they stepped inside, the smell of whiskey and tobacco smoke mingling with the aroma of cooking meat. Garrett led her to a corner table, partially shielded from the rest of the room, and pulled out a chair for her. "Sit tight." "I'll get us some food," he said, before making his way to the bar. Emma watched him from beneath her lashes. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew his place in the world, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled at the nape of his neck. His clothes were worn but clean, marking him as a working man rather than one of the gamblers or drifters that frequented establishments like this. When he returned with 2 plates of steaming stew and a couple of biscuits, Emma's mouth watered at the sight. She mumbled a quick thanks and began to eat, still keeping her face downturned. "You got a name?" Garrett asked after they'd eaten in silence for a few minutes. Emma swallowed hard. "Emma," she replied softly, deciding that her first name was safe enough to share, just Emma. She nodded, not willing to give her full name in case Thomas had already started looking for her. Garrett didn't press the issue. Instead, he said, "You're new to Redemption Creek, passing through or planning to stay?" "Passing through," Emma answered quickly. I'm heading west." West is a mighty big place, Garrett remarked. Got family out that way? Emma shook her head, pushing the half-empty bowl away. No family, just opportunities. Garrett's gaze was steady, assessing. Must be some mighty fine opportunities to have you traveling alone. Emma didn't respond, discomfort crawling up her spine. She shouldn't have agreed to this meal. Shouldn't have stopped in this town at all. Every minute she stayed in one place increased the chances of Thomas finding her. I should go, she said abruptly, rising from her chair. Thank you for the meal, Mr. Kingston. Garrett stood as well, concern etched on his features. Wait, please, I didn't mean to pry. It's just that a young woman traveling alone through these parts, it ain't safe. I can take care of myself, Emma insisted, though they both knew it wasn't true. At least let me help you find a place to stay for the night. Mrs. Peterson runs a boarding house on Elm Street. It's clean, affordable, and she doesn't ask too many questions. Emma hesitated again. The sun was setting and she had nowhere to go. The logical part of her knew she needed rest before continuing her journey, but the fearful part, the part that jumped at shadows and flinched at loud noises, urged her to keep moving. Why are you helping me? She asked, suspicion coloring her tone. Garrett's expression softened. My mama raised me to help folks in need, and whether you want to admit it or not, you're in need right now. Their eyes met briefly before Emma looked away again. There was something in his gaze, a kindness she hadn't encountered in a long time that made her chest ache. All right, she conceded. I'll stay at the boarding house, just for tonight. Relief washed over Garrett's face. Good, I'll walk you there. The evening air had cooled considerably as they made their way down the dusty main street. Emma wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, wishing she'd had time to grab her coat before fleeing her home. Cold? Garrett asked, noticing her discomfort. Before she could respond, he shrugged out of his leather coat and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth of the garment, combined with the lingering scent of leather and pine, enveloped her immediately. Oh, I couldn't, Emma began to protest. I'm plenty warm, Garrett insisted. Ranch work builds up the heat in a man. Emma clutched the edges of the coat, gratitude warring with her instinct to refuse help. Thank you, she said quietly. They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Garrett spoke again. Whatever you're running from, Emma. Redemption Creek might be a good place to catch your breath. It's a small town, but decent folks live here. People who mind their own business for the most part. Emma's steps faltered. Is it that obvious I'm running? Garrett's gaze was steady but gentle, only to someone who's looking. They arrived at a neat two-story house with a small sign declaring it Peterson's boarding house. A warm glow emanated from the windows, and the sound of muted conversation drifted out to the street. Mrs. Peterson's a good woman, Garrett said as they approached the front door. She'll treat you fair. Emma nodded, already slipping his coat from her shoulders to return it. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and Emma couldn't help but notice the calluses on his hands, evidence of hard work and honest living. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Kingston, she said formally, needing to establish some distance between them. Getting attached to anyone in this town would only complicate her plans to keep moving. Garrett, he corrected with a small smile. And you're welcome, Emma. He tipped his hat and took a step back, but hesitated before turning away. If you need anything at all, you can find me at the Double K Ranch. Just ask anyone in town for directions. Emma nodded again, not trusting herself to speak. Something about this man stirred emotions she'd thought long buried beneath layers of fear and survival instinct. With one last tip of his hat, Garrett walked away, leaving Emma standing on the doorstep of her temporary shelter. She watched him go, his tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky, before taking a deep breath and knocking on the door of the boarding house. Mrs. Peterson was indeed a kind woman, though her sharp eyes took in Emma's bruised face with a knowing look that made Emma want to sink into the floor. Still, the older woman asked no questions as she showed Emma to a small but clean room on the second floor. Bathrooms down the hall, Mrs. Peterson explained. Breakfast is at 7, but I'll keep a plate warm if you're sleeping in. It's included in the rate. Thank you, Emma said, already calculating how many nights she could afford to stay. As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Peterson added, if you're looking for work, Millie at the dress shop might need help. She was complaining just yesterday about falling behind on orders. Emma brightened at this information. She was an accomplished seamstress, having learned the trade from her mother. Thank you for letting me know. I'll inquire tomorrow. Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly. Get some rest, dear. You look like you need it. Left alone in the small room, Emma sat heavily on the bed. The events of the day of the past week suddenly crashed over her in a wave of exhaustion. She hadn't allowed herself to truly rest since fleeing her home, always looking over her shoulder, always ready to run. As she prepared for bed, washing her face in the basin provided, Emma caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. The bruise on her cheek had turned a sickly yellow-green, but it was fading. In time, all physical evidence of Thomas's cruelty would disappear. The memories, however, would take much longer to fade. Emma touched the bruise gingerly, remembering the rage in Thomas's eyes when he'd struck her. It hadn't been the first time, but Emma had sworn it would be the last. No matter what it took, she would never go back to that life. With that resolve firmly in mind, Emma blew out the lamp and climbed into bed. For the first time in days, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The morning brought sunshine streaming through the thin curtains of Emma's room, rousing her from the most restful sleep she'd had in months. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind before she remembered where she was. Redemption Creek, in Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. After washing and dressing in her one change of clothes, Emma made her way downstairs to the dining room. A few other boarders were already seated at the long table, but they barely glanced up as she entered. Mrs. Peterson, however, greeted her warmly. "Good morning, dear. Help yourself to breakfast. There's plenty." The spread was simple but hearty: eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy. Emma filled her plate, realizing how truly hungry she was after having a proper meal the night before. "I was wondering," Emma began hesitantly after finishing her breakfast, "could you give me directions to the dress shop you mentioned?" Mrs. Peterson beamed. "Of course. It's just down Main Street, past the general store, Milla's Dressmaking and Alterations. You can't miss it." Emma thanked her and set out, her stride purposeful as she navigated the morning bustle of Redemption Creek. The town was larger than she'd initially thought, with a mix of wooden storefronts and more substantial brick buildings lining the main thoroughfare. Millie's shop was indeed easy to find, with a cheerful sign and a display window showcasing a fashionable day dress. Emma's heart quickened as she pushed open the door, a small bell announcing her arrival. "Be with you in a moment," called a harried voice from the back of the shop. Emma waited patiently, taking in the neat rows of fabric bolts, the spools of thread in every color imaginable, and the half-finished garments draped over dressmakers' forms. The familiarity of it all brought a lump to her throat. Sewing had once been her joy, before Thomas had deemed it a waste of time. A plump, middle-aged woman emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Good morning. What can I help you with today?" Her welcoming smile faltered slightly as she noticed Emma's fading bruise, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. "Good morning," Emma replied. "I heard you might be in need of help. I'm an experienced seamstress." Milla's eyes lit up. "Are you indeed? Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways. I've been praying for an extra pair of hands. Mrs. Wellington's daughter is getting married in 3 weeks, and I'm drowning in alterations on top of my regular work." Emma smiled, hope blooming in her chest. "I can start immediately if you'd like." "Let's see what you can do first," Millie said practically. She gestured to a partially completed bodice on a nearby table. "Show me how you'd finish the dart on this." Emma took up the needle with confident fingers, working quickly but meticulously to create a perfect, nearly invisible dart. Millie watched with an appraising eye, nodding in approval as Emma tied off the thread. "Well now, you do know your way around a needle and thread," Millie said, examining Emma's work. I can offer you $2 a day to start, with a raise if things work out. Hours are 8 to 6 with Sundays off. How does that sound? It was more than Emma had dared hope for. That sounds wonderful, thank you. Excellent, you can start right now, and your name is… Emma Calloway. The words were out before she could stop them. Emma froze, realizing she'd just given her full name, the name Thomas would be using to track her. If Millie noticed her sudden tension, she didn't comment on it. Well, Emma Calloway, welcome to Millie's dressmaking and alterations. Let me show you what needs doing. The day passed in a blur of fabric, thread, and quiet conversation. Millie was a chatterer by nature, filling Emma in on all the town gossip as they worked side by side. Emma listened with half an ear, her hands busy with familiar tasks that brought a measure of peace to her troubled mind. By closing time, Emma had earned not only her first day's wages but also Millie's wholehearted approval. "You're a godsend, Emma," the older woman declared as she counted out $2 silver. "Come back tomorrow, same time," Emma nodded, pocketing the money with a sense of accomplishment. For the first time since her escape, she felt a glimmer of hope that she might actually build a new life for herself. That hope wavered slightly as she stepped out of the shop and nearly collided with a broad chest. Emma stumbled back, apology on her lips, only to look up into the familiar face of Garrett Kingston. "Emma," he said, his smile warm and genuine. "I was hoping I'd run into you." Emma found herself returning his smile despite her resolution to keep her distance. "Hello, Garrett." "I see you found work at Millie's," he observed, nodding toward the shop behind her. "Yes, today was my first day," Emma confirmed. "How did you know?" Garrett rubbed the back of his neck, looking slightly sheepish. "Small town, news travels fast. And I may have asked Mrs. Peterson if you'd settled in all right." The admission should have alarmed Emma. A man taking an interest in her whereabouts had rarely meant anything good in her experience, but something about Garrett's straightforward manner put her at ease. "I see," she said, adjusting her shawl around her shoulders. "Well, as you can see, I'm doing just fine." "Glad to hear it," Garrett replied. "I actually came into town to invite you to Sunday dinner at the ranch. Mrs. Wilkins, our cook, makes a roast that would make angels weep, and I thought you might enjoy getting out of town for a spell." Emma blinked, taken aback by the invitation. "Sunday dinner, at your ranch? Nothing improper," Garrett hastened to assure her. "Plenty of folks will be there, ranch hands, neighbors. It's something of a tradition at the Double K." Emma hesitated. The sensible thing would be to decline, to maintain the emotional distance necessary for someone in her position. And yet, the thought of spending another quiet Sunday alone in her boarding house room held little appeal. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Garrett nodded, accepting her non-commitment with good grace. "Fair enough. If you decide to come, I'll pick you up at Mrs. Peterson's around noon. If not, no hard feelings." "Thank you for the invitation," Emma said, meaning it. They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to part ways, until Garrett cleared his throat. "Can I walk you back to the boarding house? It's getting dark." Emma glanced at the lengthening shadows and nodded. "Thank you." They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the evening settling around them like a comfortable blanket. Emma found herself stealing glances at Garrett's profile, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, as if he smiled often. "How long have you been at the Double K?" she asked, breaking the silence. Garrett's expression softened with fondness. "Going on 10 years now. Started as a regular hand when I was 19, worked my way up to foreman by 25. Mr. Klein, that's the K in Double K, he's been like a father to me. And the other K? That would be Kingston," Garrett explained. "Me. Mr. Klein has no children of his own, and when his health started failing a few years back, he made me a partner in the ranch. Said he couldn't think of anyone he'd rather have carrying on his legacy." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and Emma felt a twinge of envy for the sense of belonging he clearly felt. "It sounds like you've found your place in the world," Garrett nodded. "I have. The ranch, the land." It gets in your blood, becomes part of who you are. He glanced at her curiously. What about you? What's your passion, Emma Calloway? Emma tensed at the use of her full name. How did you? Millie mentioned it to Dr. Harrison when I was picking up some liniment at his office, Garrett explained. Like I said, small town. Emma sighed, resigning herself to the reality that anonymity was perhaps impossible in a place like Redemption Creek. My passion was always sewing, she admitted after a moment. Creating beautiful things from nothing but cloth and thread. Was. Garrett prompted gently. Emma's hand drifted unconsciously to her bruised cheek. My husband, he didn't approve, said it was frivolous. Garrett's expression darkened, his gaze fixing on the bruise he had undoubtedly noticed from the beginning. Your husband, he said flatly. He's the one you're running from. It wasn't a question, but Emma nodded anyway, the admission both terrifying and liberating. Yes. They had reached the boarding house, and Emma turned to face Garrett fully, needing him to understand. He'll be looking for me. That's why I can't stay in one place too long, why I shouldn't. Make connections. Garrett's eyes were serious as they met hers. Emma, I don't know what you've been through, and I won't pretend to understand, but I do know that running forever isn't living. At some point you have to stand your ground. You don't know Thomas, Emma whispered, fear creeping back into her voice. He won't stop until he finds me. Then maybe it's time someone stood between you and him, Garrett said quietly. The simple statement, delivered without bravado or posturing, brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes. She blinked them away hastily, unwilling to show such vulnerability. I should go in, she said, her voice not quite steady. Garrett nodded, respecting her need for space. Think about Sunday, he reminded her. Fresh air might do you good. Emma managed a small smile. I will. Good night, Garrett. Good night, Emma. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Emma found herself genuinely considering Garrett's invitation. The thought of spending time at the ranch, away from the confines of town, was appealing in a way she hadn't expected. And if she was being honest with herself, the prospect of spending more time with Garrett Kingston was perhaps the most appealing aspect of all. That realization should have sent her packing immediately. Emotional entanglements were the last thing she needed, but instead, Emma found herself considering what she might wear on Sunday, should she decide to accept the invitation. The next few days fell into a pleasant routine. Emma worked diligently at Millie's shop, earning praise for her fine stitching and eye for detail. In the evenings, she took her meals at the boarding house, gradually becoming acquainted with her fellow boarders, a schoolteacher, a clerk from the bank, and an elderly widow who knitted constantly. Redemption Creek began to feel less like a temporary stop and more like a place she could belong, if circumstances were different. Emma found herself noticing details she would have previously overlooked: the way the morning light hit the mountains to the west, the friendly nods from shopkeepers as she passed, the comforting rhythm of a town going about its daily business. Garrett stopped by the shop once more on Friday, ostensibly to order a new shirt, but his lingering presence and the way his eyes sought hers suggested other motivations. Millie observed their interaction with poorly concealed interest, her eyebrows raised in silent question when Garrett finally departed. Not a word, Emma warned, though she couldn't entirely suppress her smile. Millie held up her hands in mock surrender. I didn't say anything. Though I will say that Garrett Kingston is the finest catch in 3 counties, and not just because he's part owner of the most prosperous ranch around. I'm still married, Emma reminded her quietly, Millie's expression sobered. To the man who gave you that bruise, I presume. Emma looked away, unable to meet the older woman's knowing gaze. Some marriages aren't meant to last, dear, Millie said gently. And some don't deserve to have ever happened in the first place. The simple wisdom in those words stayed with Emma throughout the day and into the night. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her small room, Emma allowed herself to imagine a life free from Thomas's shadow, a life where she could pursue her passion for sewing, where she could walk down the street without constantly looking over her shoulder, where she could perhaps even open her heart to someone worthy of her trust. By the time Sunday morning arrived, Emma had made her decision. She dressed with care in her best dress, a modest blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranged her hair in a simple but flattering style. The bruise on her face had faded to a barely noticeable yellow, easily concealed with a touch of powder Millie had lent her. When Garrett arrived at the boarding house precisely at noon, driving a well-kept buggy pulled by a handsome bay horse, Emma was waiting on the porch. The smile that lit his face when he saw her sent a warm flutter through her chest. "You decided to come," he said, helping her into the buggy with a gentle hand. "I did," Emma replied, settling her skirts around her. "I hope Mrs. Wilkins' roast lives up to your description." Garrett laughed as he climbed in beside her. "I may have undersold it, actually. Prepare to be amazed." The drive to the Double K Ranch took about 30 minutes, during which Garrett pointed out local landmarks and shared amusing stories about life on the ranch. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in years, the weight of her troubles temporarily lifted by his easy companionship. The ranch itself was impressive, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and beyond them, seemingly endless pastureland dotted with cattle. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the spring warmth. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed as Garrett helped her down from the buggy. "Thank you," he replied, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Come on, I'll introduce you to everyone." Everyone turned out to be quite a gathering. In addition to the ranch hands, a colorful assortment of men of various ages, there was Mr. Klein himself, a frail but sharp-eyed elderly man who greeted Emma with courtly manners. Mrs. Wilkins, the cook, a robust woman with a booming laugh, and several families from neighboring ranches who had come for the Sunday meal. To Emma's relief, no one asked probing questions about her past or made comments about her fading bruise. Instead, she was welcomed warmly into the fold, treated as if Sunday dinner at the Double K was a perfectly natural place for her to be. The meal itself was everything Garrett had promised and more. They ate at long tables set up in the shade of ancient oak trees, the mountain breeze providing relief from the afternoon warmth. Mrs. Wilkins' roast was indeed spectacular, accompanied by potatoes, fresh vegetables from the kitchen garden, and crusty bread still warm from the oven. Emma found herself seated between Garrett and Mr. Klein, who regaled her with stories of the early days of the ranch. "When I first came here in '46, there was nothing but wild country," the old man told her. "Indians still roamed these parts, and a man had to sleep with one eye open if he wanted to keep his scalp." "Mr. Klein," Garrett admonished gently, "you're exaggerating again." The old rancher waved a dismissive hand. "Maybe a little, but it was wild country, that's God's truth. Not like now, with the railroad coming through and folks settling everywhere you look." "It still seems pretty wild to me," Emma commented, glancing at the vast expanse of land surrounding them. Mr. Klein chuckled. "That's because you're from back east, I reckon. Everything west of the Mississippi probably looks wild to you." Emma didn't correct his assumption about her origins, finding it easier to let him believe she came from further east rather than explain she had only fled from a town 2 days' ride away. After the meal, while the men discussed cattle prices and the women exchanged recipes, Garrett invited Emma to see the rest of the ranch. "If you're interested, that is," he added, suddenly seeming almost shy. "I'd like that," Emma replied, grateful for the chance to escape the crowd for a while, pleasant as they were. They walked side by side, Garrett pointing out various aspects of the ranch operation, the new breeding stock he'd acquired, the improvements he'd made to the irrigation system, the orchard he'd planted 3 years ago that was just starting to bear fruit. "You've built something remarkable here," Emma observed as they paused by a creek that ran through the property, its clear water glinting in the afternoon sun. Garrett's expression was thoughtful as he gazed out over the land. "It's been a labor of love. When I first came here, I was just a kid with nothing but the clothes on my back and a determination to make something of myself. Mr. Klein saw something in me I didn't even see in myself back then. He clearly thinks of you as a son, Emma said softly. Garrett nodded. He's the father I never had. My own pa. Well, he wasn't much for raising children, left when I was 7 and my ma worked herself to death trying to keep us fed. A shadow crossed his face at the memory. I promised myself I'd never be that kind of man. That I'd build something lasting, something good. The simple sincerity in his voice touched Emma deeply. Here was a man who understood what it meant to create a home, to nurture rather than destroy. The contrast between Garrett and Thomas could not have been more stark. You've succeeded, she told him, meaning it. Garrett turned to her then, his eyes searching her face. Emma, I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to know that you're welcome here, not just for Sunday dinner, but whenever you need a safe place. The kindness in his offer brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes. She looked away quickly, blinking them back. Thank you, she managed. That means more than you know. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the gentle burble of the creek and the distant lowing of cattle. Then, with a deep breath, Emma made a decision. My husband's name is Thomas Blackburn, she said, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. We've been married for 3 years. He wasn't always cruel, or at least I didn't see it at first. But after his business failed, he started drinking, and then the beatings began. Garrett's expression darkened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. I tried to leave once before, but he found me and... Emma's hand drifted unconsciously to her ribs, where the evidence of that failed attempt was still etched in a faint scar. I learned my lesson. This time I was more careful. I waited until he passed out drunk, took what little money I could find and ran. That was 2 weeks ago. And you think he's looking for you, Garrett stated. Emma nodded, fear clutching at her heart once more. I know he is. Thomas is. Possessive. He doesn't love me, I don't think he ever did, but he considers me his property. He won't stop until he finds me. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if he was carefully considering his next words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but Emma could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. No man has the right to treat his wife or any woman the way this Thomas has treated you. Whatever happens, Emma, I want you to know that you're not alone anymore, not if you don't want to be. The simple declaration, offered without demands or expectations, broke something loose inside Emma, a dam of emotion she'd been holding back for far too long. Tears spilled down her cheeks as years of fear, loneliness, and quiet desperation poured out of her. Garrett hesitated only a moment before gently drawing her into his arms, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head as she cried against his chest. He made no attempt to hush her or tell her everything would be all right. He simply held her, offering the comfort of human contact without asking for anything in return. When Emma's tears finally subsided, she pulled back slightly, embarrassed by her breakdown. I'm sorry, she began, wiping at her damp cheeks. I don't usually. Don't apologize, Garrett said firmly. Not for feeling and certainly not for trusting me enough to share your burden. Emma looked up at him, really looked at him, taking in the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his features, the steadiness he seemed to radiate. In that moment, something shifted between them, something neither could quite name but both could feel. The moment was broken by the distant sound of Mrs. Wilkins ringing the dinner bell, signaling that dessert was being served. We should head back, Garrett said reluctantly, though he made no move to release her. Emma nodded, equally reluctant to break the connection between them. Yes, we should. They walked back to the gathering in silence, but it was a comfortable silence filled with unspoken understanding. As they rejoined the others for apple pie and coffee, Emma found herself watching Garrett interact with the ranch hands and neighbors, noting the respect in their eyes when they addressed him, the easy camaraderie they shared. This was a man who had built not just a successful ranch but a community, a family of sorts, bound not by blood but by mutual respect and shared purpose. It was everything Emma had once dreamed of for herself, before Thomas had systematically destroyed those dreams. As the afternoon waned and guests began to depart, Emma found herself dreading the return to town. The day at the Double K had been like a glimpse into another life, a life where she was valued, where she belonged. "Ready to head back?" Garrett asked as he helped her into the buggy once more. Emma nodded, though her heart wasn't in it. "Yes, thank you for today. It was wonderful." The drive back to Redemption Creek was quieter than the journey out, both of them lost in their own thoughts as the landscape rolled by. When they reached the boarding house, Garrett helped her down from the buggy, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Would you like to come to the ranch again next Sunday?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice that Emma found endearing. "I would," she replied without hesitation, "very much." The smile that lit his face warmed her from the inside out. "Good, that's good." They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to say goodbye, until Emma gathered her courage and rose on tiptoe to press a quick, chaste kiss to Garrett's cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Before he could respond, she turned and hurried into the boarding house, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. It had been a small gesture, that kiss, but it felt monumental, a step away from her past and toward a future she was only beginning to imagine. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that brought Emma more happiness than she had known in years. She worked at Millie's shop during the week, improving her skills and slowly building a modest savings. On Sundays, Garrett would pick her up promptly at noon, and they would spend the day at the Double K, sometimes joining the communal dinner, other times exploring the ranch or simply sitting by the creek, talking for hours. Emma found herself opening up to Garrett in ways she had never done with anyone, sharing childhood memories, dreams for the future, even the darkest moments of her marriage to Thomas. In return, Garrett told her of his own struggles, the poverty of his youth, the years of hard work to prove himself, the loneliness that sometimes plagued him despite his success. With each passing day, the connection between them deepened, transforming from friendship to something more profound. Yet neither of them spoke of it directly, both aware of the obstacle that stood between them. Emma was still legally married to a man who considered her his property. It was Millie who finally broached the subject, on a quiet afternoon when the shop was empty of customers. "You care for him, don't you?" she asked, watching Emma's face closely. "Garrett Kingston." Emma's hands stilled on the dress she was hemming. "Is it that obvious?" Millie chuckled. "To anyone with eyes, dear, and he cares for you just as much, if not more." "It doesn't matter," Emma said softly. "I'm still married." "In the eyes of the law, perhaps," Millie agreed. "But in the eyes of God, a man who beats his wife has broken his vows as surely as if he'd taken another woman to his bed, even if that's true, divorce is." Emma hesitated, the word itself feeling scandalous. "Difficult, yes," Millie finished for her, "but not impossible. Judge Parker in Fort Smith has granted divorces for less than what you've endured." Emma looked up in surprise. "You think I could actually obtain a divorce, with the right lawyer and enough witnesses to your husband's cruelty?" "Yes, I do." Millie set aside her sewing and leaned forward. "Emma, you deserve a chance at happiness, real happiness, with a man who treats you like the treasure you are." The hope that bloomed in Emma's chest was both terrifying and exhilarating. Could she truly free herself from Thomas legally? Could she build a new life, perhaps even with Garrett, without constantly looking over her shoulder? That evening, Emma shared Millie's suggestion with Garrett as they sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "A divorce," Garrett repeated thoughtfully. "It's not an easy path, Emma. There would be talk, judgment." "I know," Emma acknowledged. "But if it meant being truly free of Thomas, I think I could bear it." Garrett was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. Then, with a decision seemingly made, he turned to face her fully. "Emma, I need to be honest with you," he began, his voice serious. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, they've been the happiest of my life." Emma's heart quickened at his words, hope and fear warring within her. "I care for you," Garrett continued, "more than I thought possible in such a short time. And if there comes a day when you're free, truly free, I want you to know that I would be honored to court you properly." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I care for you too, Garrett, so much that it frightens me sometimes." Garrett reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her cheek, the one that had once been bruised, but now showed no trace of Thomas's cruelty. "You don't need to be frightened, not of me. I would rather cut off my own hand than raise it against you." "I know," Emma whispered, leaning into his touch. "That's not what frightens me, it's the intensity of what I feel after such a short time." Garrett's smile was tender. "Some things don't need time, Emma, some things you just know." He leaned forward, his intention clear, and Emma met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, Emma felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. "I'll speak to Judge Wilson tomorrow," Garrett said, his voice slightly hoarse. "He'll know the best lawyer to handle your divorce." Emma nodded, determination replacing fear. "And I'll start gathering evidence, letters I've kept, perhaps statements from neighbors in my old town who witnessed Thomas's behavior." The plan was made, the decision taken. Yet even as they parted that evening, both buoyed by hope for the future, neither could have anticipated how quickly that future would arrive or the form it would take. The following morning dawned bright and clear, with no hint of the storm that was about to break. Emma was at her usual place in Millie's shop, working on a wedding dress for the banker's daughter, when the bell above the door jangled harshly. "I'm looking for my wife," said a cold, familiar voice that sent ice cascading through Emma's veins. She looked up slowly, already knowing what she would see. Thomas Blackburn stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light, his face set in a mask of barely controlled rage. He was thinner than when she'd last seen him, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw, but his eyes were the same cold, calculating, cruel. "There you are," he said, his gaze fixing on Emma with the intensity of a predator that has finally cornered its prey. "Do you have any idea what you've put me through, Emma?" Emma couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Fear paralyzed her, sending her right back to the terrified woman who had endured years of abuse. Millie, however, was not so easily cowed. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my shop," she said firmly, moving to stand between Emma and Thomas. Thomas barely spared her a glance. "This is between me and my wife, madam. Step aside." "I will not," Millie declared, her chin lifting defiantly. "Emma is under my employment and my protection. If you have business with her, you can state it civilly or leave." Thomas's face darkened dangerously. "You don't want to interfere in a marital dispute, old woman. Now move, or I'll move you myself." He took a step forward, and something in his movement broke through Emma's paralysis. She had seen that step before, the precursor to violence that had become all too familiar during her marriage. "Don't touch her," Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt as she rose from her chair. "Millie, it's all right, I'll speak with him." "Emma, you don't have to," Millie began, but Emma shook her head. "It's all right," she repeated, though they both knew it was anything but. "Thomas, let's talk outside." A smile that didn't reach his eyes spread across Thomas's face. "That's better." "Come along, wife. We have a long journey home ahead of us." Emma's heart raced as she followed him out of the shop, her mind frantically searching for a way out of this nightmare. She couldn't go with him, wouldn't go with him, but confronting him directly would only provoke his temper. Once outside, Thomas gripped her arm roughly, his fingers digging into her flesh. "You've led me on quite a chase," he hissed, all pretense of civility gone. "But it ends now. Get your things. We're leaving this God-forsaken town." Emma tried to pull away, panic rising in her throat. "No, Thomas." "I'm not going with you." His grip tightened painfully. "This isn't a negotiation, Emma. You're my wife, and you'll do as I say." "Let her go." The command, delivered in a voice as hard as steel, came from behind them. Emma turned her head to see Garrett standing there, his expression thunderous as he took in the scene before him. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "And who might you be?" "Garrett Kingston, owner of the Double K Ranch and friend to Miss Calloway." Garrett's emphasis on Miss was subtle but unmistakable, a deliberate refusal to acknowledge Thomas's claim on Emma. "Well, Mr. Kingston, you're interfering in a private matter between a man and his wife," Thomas said coldly. "I suggest you move along." "Not until you release her arm," Garrett replied, his stance relaxed but ready like a coiled spring. Thomas sneered. "Or what? You'll force me. That would be assault, Mr. Kingston, and I doubt the local sheriff would look kindly on that." "Actually," came another voice, "the sheriff might have a different view entirely." Sheriff James Miller stepped forward, his badge glinting in the sunlight. "I received reports of a disturbance and it seems they were accurate. Sir, I'm going to ask you to release the lady." Thomas hesitated, clearly calculating his odds against both Garrett and the law. Reluctantly, he loosened his grip on Emma's arm, though he didn't fully release her. "Sheriff, this woman is my lawful wife," Thomas insisted. "She ran away, taking money that belonged to me. I'm simply retrieving what's mine." The sheriff's expression remained impassive. "Be that as it may, in my town, we don't manhandle women, wives or otherwise. Now, if you have a legitimate grievance, we can discuss it civilly at my office." Emma found her voice at last. "Sheriff Miller, this man, my husband, has beaten me repeatedly over the course of our marriage. I fled for my life 2 weeks ago. If you send me back with him, I fear he'll kill me." Thomas's face contorted with rage. "That's a lie. I've never laid a hand on her in anger." "She's hysterical, making up stories to justify her abandonment of her wifely duties." "She's telling the truth," Garrett interjected, his eyes never leaving Thomas. "I saw the bruises myself when she first arrived in town." By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Emma was acutely aware of the whispers, the curious stares, but she forced herself to stand tall. She was done hiding, done being ashamed of what had been done to her. "Sheriff," she said clearly, "I was planning to file for divorce on grounds of cruelty. I have evidence letters I wrote to my sister detailing the abuse, a doctor in our hometown who treated my injuries." The sheriff nodded slowly. "That changes things." He turned to Thomas. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to my office while we sort this out." Thomas's grip suddenly tightened again, making Emma gasp in pain. "I'm not going anywhere without my wife," he snarled, his control finally snapping. "And if any of you try to stop me, He never finished the threat." In a move so swift Emma barely saw it happen, Garrett closed the distance between them, broke Thomas's hold on her arm, and pushed her safely behind him. The two men stood face to face, Garrett's controlled anger a stark contrast to Thomas's wild fury. "You've touched her for the last time," Garrett said, his voice deadly quiet. Thomas lunged forward, swinging wildly, but Garrett easily sidestepped the attack. The ensuing fight was brief but decisive. Thomas, fueled by rage but hampered by what Emma suspected was lingering drunkenness, was no match for Garrett's disciplined strength. Within moments, Thomas was on the ground, the sheriff's knee in his back as handcuffs were secured around his wrists. "Thomas Blackburn, you're under arrest for assault and disturbing the peace," Sheriff Miller announced, hauling the struggling man to his feet. "You'll cool your heels in my jail until Judge Wilson can hear this matter." As the sheriff led Thomas away, still shouting threats and obscenities, Emma found herself trembling uncontrollably. The confrontation she had dreaded for weeks had finally happened, and while she was still standing, the reality of facing Thomas again had shaken her to her core. Garrett turned to her, his expression softening from anger to concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Emma shook her head, though she rubbed her arm where Thomas's fingers had dug in. "Just shaken," she managed. The crowd was still watching, their expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity to judgment. Emma felt exposed, vulnerable, as if her most private pain had been put on display for the entertainment of strangers. Sensing her discomfort, Garrett gently placed his coat around her shoulders, shielding her from the curious stares. "Let's get you somewhere quiet," he murmured. "This has been enough of a spectacle already." He guided her away from the crowd, his hand a steady presence at the small of her back. They walked in silence until they reached the small church at the edge of town, its doors open but the interior empty at this hour of the day. Inside, the cool dimness was a balm to Emma's frayed nerves. She sank onto a pew, Garrett's coat still around her shoulders, and tried to steady her breathing. "He found me," she whispered, the reality of it still sinking in. "After all my caution, all my planning, he still found me." Garrett sat beside her, close but not touching, respecting her need for space. "You knew he would eventually," he reminded her gently. "But this time you weren't alone." Emma looked up at him, taking in the concern in his eyes, the way he sat ready to protect her but careful not to crowd her. Even in this moment of crisis, he was thinking of her comfort, her needs. "Thank you," she said simply. "For being there, for standing between us." Garrett shook his head. "You don't need to thank me for that, Emma. I only wish I'd been there sooner, before he had a chance to put his hands on you at all." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Garrett broke it. "What happens now is up to you," he said carefully. "The sheriff will hold Thomas at least until tomorrow, when Judge Wilson can hear the case. If you want to pursue divorce proceedings, now would be the time. Judge Wilson is fair-minded, and with Thomas's behavior today as evidence, along with whatever other proof you have." He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. Emma nodded, understanding. Thomas had shown his true nature in front of witnesses, including the sheriff himself. It might be the best chance she would ever have to legally free herself from him. "I want to be free," she said, the words firm despite her still shaking hands. "Truly free, not just running and hiding." Garrett nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Then we'll make it happen. Judge Wilson, as I said, is fair, and I know a good lawyer in Helena who specializes in these matters. I can send for him right away." "Thank you," Emma said again, overwhelmed by his support. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all of this." Garrett's expression softened further. "Emma, you don't owe me anything. What I've done because." He hesitated, then pressed on. "Because I care for you, deeply." The simple declaration, spoken in the quiet sanctuary of the church, reached something deep within Emma's soul. Despite the trauma of the day, despite the uncertainty that still lay ahead, she felt a flicker of hope stronger than any she had known before. "I care for you too," she whispered, the words both terrifying and liberating to speak aloud. Garrett's smile was like the sunrise after the darkest night. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached out and took her hand in his. Their fingers intertwined, a physical manifestation of the connection that had been growing between them from that first day by the water trough. In that moment, with the colored light from the stained glass windows falling across their joined hands, Emma allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, her story might have a happy ending after all. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, testimonies, and anxious waiting. As Garrett had promised, he sent for a lawyer from Helena, a sharp-minded man named Howard Daniels who specialized in divorce cases, and arrived in Redemption Creek just 2 days after Thomas's arrest. Thomas, for his part, alternated between rage and manipulative contrition, claiming first that Emma was his property to do with as he pleased, then that he loved her desperately and had only ever disciplined her for her own good. Neither approach found sympathy with Judge Wilson, a stern but fair-minded man who had seen too many cases of domestic violence in his long career on the bench. Emma's evidence, the letters she had written to her sister describing the abuse, the testimony of Dr. Reynolds from her hometown who had treated her injuries on multiple occasions, and the witness accounts of Thomas's behavior in Redemption Creek painted a damning picture that even Thomas's hired attorney couldn't effectively counter. When Judge Wilson finally rendered his decision, granting Emma a divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty and ordering Thomas to pay court costs, the relief that washed over her was so profound she nearly collapsed right there in the courtroom. "You are free, Mrs. Calloway, or rather, Miss Calloway once again," Judge Wilson announced, his voice solemn but kind. "May you find peace and happiness in your future endeavors." Thomas was escorted from the courtroom in handcuffs, having been charged separately with assault for his attack on Emma in front of Millie's shop. The last Emma saw of him was his back as the sheriff led him away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Garrett was waiting for her outside the courthouse, his face breaking into a wide smile when he saw her expression. "It's done?" he asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. Emma nodded, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. "It's done, I'm free." Without hesitation, Garrett swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that drew chuckles and knowing looks from passers-by. Emma didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt light, unburdened, as if she could truly breathe again. As Garrett set her back on her feet, his hands lingered at her waist, his eyes searching hers. "Emma," he began, his voice suddenly serious, "I know this is fast, perhaps too fast, but I need to ask you something." Emma's heart quickened, both in anticipation and a flicker of fear. "What is it?" Garrett took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. It wasn't an elaborate engagement ring, but a plain wedding band, well-worn and clearly cherished. "This was my mother's," Garrett explained, his voice soft with emotion. "She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to the woman who captured my heart the way she had captured my father's." Emma's breath caught in her throat as Garrett continued. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I know you've just escaped a marriage that brought you nothing but pain. I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to marry again." His eyes held hers, earnest and vulnerable. "But I love you, Emma Calloway. I think I've loved you since that first day when you were hiding your bruised face but still had the courage to meet my eyes. And if you'll have me, I would be honored to call you my wife." Emma stared at the ring, then at Garrett's face, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. It was fast, incredibly fast. She had only just secured her freedom, had only just begun to rediscover who she was outside of Thomas's shadow. And yet, she knew, with a certainty that defied logic or explanation, that Garrett Kingston was nothing like Thomas Blackburn. That a marriage to Garrett would be a partnership of equals, built on respect and genuine love. "People will talk," she said softly. "They'll say I divorced one man only to immediately marry another." Garrett shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "Let them talk. We know the truth, and that's what matters." Emma looked at the ring again, this tangible symbol of a mother's love, offered now as a promise of a different kind of love, a better kind. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out, not to take the ring, but to cup Garrett's cheek in her palm. "Ask me again," she whispered. "Not today, not tomorrow, but in a month. Give me that time to stand on my own, to be sure of my own heart, and then, if you still want to, ask me again." Garrett's smile was understanding, patient, without a hint of disappointment. He closed his hand around the ring and tucked it back into his pocket. "A month it is," he agreed. "And Emma, I'll still want to." True to his word, Garrett didn't press the issue over the following weeks. He continued to visit Emma at the boarding house, to take her to Sunday dinners at the ranch, to court her properly with flowers and small gifts and long conversations by the creek. But he never again mentioned marriage, respecting her need for time and space. Emma, for her part, threw herself into her work at Millie's shop with renewed vigor. With Thomas gone from her life for good, she could finally plan for a future without fear. She began saving money in earnest, even entertaining the idea of opening her own dressmaking shop someday. She also spent time getting to know the people of Redemption Creek more deeply, not as a woman in hiding, but as Emma Calloway, seamstress and free woman. She joined the Ladies' Aid Society, attended church socials, and gradually found herself becoming part of the community in a way she had never dared hope for. and through it all, her feelings for Garrett only deepened. Without the cloud of fear hanging over her, she could see clearly what she had perhaps known all along. That this man, with his quiet strength and unwavering respect, had captured her heart completely. When exactly 1 month had passed since the day at the courthouse, Emma wasn't surprised to find Garrett waiting on the porch of the boarding house after she returned from work. He wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his expression a mixture of hope and nervous anticipation that made her heart swell with tenderness. "Evening, Emma," he greeted her, rising from his seat as she approached. "I was wondering if you might join me for a walk." Emma smiled, knowing exactly what this walk would entail. "I'd like that very much." They strolled through town and beyond, eventually finding themselves at the same creek where they had first truly opened up to each other. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the water, the mountains in the distance painted in shades of purple and rose. "It's been a month," Garrett said simply, turning to face her. Emma nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation rather than fear. "It has." Garrett took both her hands in his touch warm and steady. "These weeks have been the happiest of my life, Emma. Getting to know you better, watching you blossom now that you're free, it's only made me more certain of what I already knew." He reached into his pocket and once again withdrew his mother's ring. "I love you, Emma Calloway. With all that I am, I love you, and if you'll have me, I would be the proudest man alive to call you my wife." Emma looked into his eyes, kind eyes that had never looked at her with anything but respect and admiration, and felt the last of her doubts melt away. "Yes," she said simply, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "Yes, Garrett Kingston, I will marry you." Garrett's face lit up with such pure happiness that Emma couldn't help but laugh as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. "I love you," she told him, the words coming easily now. "I think perhaps I've loved you from that first day too, when you lifted my chin and looked at me as if my bruises didn't define me." Garrett pulled her gently into his arms, one hand coming up to cup her face, her unmarked, healing face with infinite tenderness. "They never did," he murmured. "Your strength, your kindness, your courage, those are what define you, Emma. Those are what I fell in love with." As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing them in the soft light of dusk, Garrett lowered his head and kissed her a kiss full of promise, of healing, of a future brighter than either could have imagined. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church, where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by the friends they had made in Redemption Creek: Millie, Mrs. Peterson, the ranch hands from the Double K, and Mr. Klein, who insisted on giving Emma away despite his frail health. As they exchanged vows, Emma marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a bruised and terrified woman hiding her face from the world, to a bride standing proudly beside the man she loved, surrounded by a community that had embraced her as one of their own. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett gently lifted Emma's chin with his finger, echoing that first gesture from months ago, but this time with a world of love and commitment behind it. "My wife," he whispered, just for her ears, before sealing their union with a kiss that promised a lifetime of respect, partnership, and unwavering love. And as the church bells rang out over Redemption Creek, Emma knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along, not just freedom from cruelty, but a home, a family, and a love that would never seek to diminish her, only to help her shine.